Guilty, verdict, verdict, guilty, verdict, guilty, verdict, guilty.
Oh, yeah.
Alec Murdaugh, a scion from a prominent local family of lawyers and solicitors, found guilty of murdering his wife Maggie and son Paul after just 3 hours of jury deliberations.
It doesn't matter who your family is. It doesn't matter how much money you have or people think you have. It doesn't matter what you think, how prominent you are. If you do wrong, if you break the law, if you murder, then justice will be done in South Carolina.
The jury was seen with their heads down, never looking in Murdaugh's direction as the verdict was read. The prominent former attorney's only living son, Buster, was present in the courtroom while the guilty verdict was read, appearing at times to wipe tears from his eyes. After the guilty verdict came down, the judge denied a motion from the defense asking for a mistrial and to set aside the verdict.
The evidence of guilt is overwhelming, and I deny the motion.
Over the roughly 6-week trial, the prosecution presented its case featuring testimony from 61 witnesses with phone forensics and extensive evidence of Murdaugh's financial misdeeds.
Our criminal justice system worked tonight. It gave a voice to Maggie and Paul Murdaugh.
The prosecution has indicated they will be seeking a life sentence without the possibility of parole, sparing him the death penalty.
So, okay. Did you get your Schadenfreude moment, Brett? Because, listen, this is amazing. First of all, what the judge said leading up to the sentencing, Rupert Murdoch. Oh, one can only wish. No, this guy, Alec Murdaugh. Why do you spell your name like that? You're such a pain in the ass. Like, from the get-go, you were a pain in the ass. But anyway, the judge, who should be played by Morgan Freeman, just saying, regal, measured, and even a doppelganger for Morgan Freeman. I mean, they looked incredible. Anyway, the judge actually said, ahead of sentencing him to 2 consecutive life sentences, not concurrent. Concurrent means that, things would run together. Consecutive means when you die with 2 consecutive life sentences, you're only halfway through your sentence. Like, you're dead and you've only served half of your sentence because you have another life sentence after your natural life ends. That is hectic, okay? That's a great penalty. And I love that they didn't go for the death penalty, because that creates a whole host of other issues about appeals and whether or not, it becomes illegal, and waiting 100 years before you even, you know what I mean? And then the governor gets involved at the end with a reprieve. No, I'm glad they didn't go for the death penalty. This guy should rot in an 8x12 cell for the rest of his freaking days, okay? That said, the stuff that the judge said ahead of the sentencing, the media isn't really showing it to you, but what he said, what this judge said, this is Judge Clifton Newman, who presided over this trial really well, and he said this. Oh, this sent chills up my spine. He said this is one of the most troubling cases for the judge, the state, the defense, the media coverage throughout the nation. You have a wife who has been murdered, a son who's been savagely murdered, a lawyer, a person from the respected family who has controlled justice. Oh my God, think about that. Who has controlled justice in this community for over a century. Oh my God, just think about what he just said. Of a family who has controlled justice in this community for over a century. A person whose grandfather's portrait hung at the back of the courthouse, who I had to have ordered removed in order to ensure that a fair trial was had by both the state and the defense. Oh my God. Now, this goes back to what we were talking about yesterday, all the different, inequalities in our society, from the very, very, very untouchable elites, the Murdaughs, the Trumps, the Jared Kushner family, right, like those. And then I was talking to you about this family who's kind of in charge of, a state, in charge of justice, in charge of law, at least for 3,200 miles of their own burb, of their own living environment, right? For 100 years. Now, what's so fascinating to the judge and me was that he said, subsequently to laying that out, I'm sure your family has sentenced people to death, and yet the state here does not seek the death penalty for you. And he said he found that, like almost refreshing. Because when you think about 100 years of justice in South Carolina, you know what we're talking about here. You know you're talking about prosecutors who prosecuted runaway slaves. You know you're talking about prosecutors who prosecuted, Jim Crow laws, who said, oh, you drank from the or you whistled at a white woman, or, get out of the elevator, or who do you think you are? You're sitting in the wrong part of the train. You're sitting in the wrong part of the bus. Holy crap. So did you get your Schadenfreude moment is what I want to know, Brett.
Well, first of all, I completely agree with you on the sentencing. The fact that he'll be rotting in a jail for the rest of his life will help me sleep just a little bit easier.
Really?
Yes. And the fact that somebody like him, who comes from so much wealth and generational power and entitlement, can be held responsible for his crimes, I don't think I'm being hyperbolic. It gives me a little bit of hope back for this country, and I mean that.
No, I felt it too, from completely different perspective. My perspective was, the inequality that that just seeps into our culture. Our culture, and that the very elite want to use our culture as being something to weaponize instead of something to solve, really peeves me, especially when you hear an African-American judge in South Carolina who, was just an amazingly regal proprietor of justice here. He was just ran a very, very nice courtroom. Be able to say, hey, listen, your entitlement ends today. It's done. Your privilege and controlling the justice for everyone in this community is over. It's done. You abused it. You used it, and you got everything from it, and you still couldn't appreciate it. You still had to weaponize it for your own benefit. And listen, when you realize that it's a jury of his quote unquote peers, not really. I mean, it's just people who live there. Took less than 3 freaking hours to bring him in guilty. Why? We don't really have a motive. I just want people who didn't follow this trial to understand. We don't know why he did it. There was some, attempt at explaining the why and the wherefores. And some of the attempts were, he's a criminal. He just is. The other attempts were, he says, he became a paranoid monster on oxycodone. This was what he wanted to feed the jury, that, he wasn't responsible because he was a drug addict, and drug addicts, lie, and drug addicts do bad things, and the drugs made him paranoid and very energized, he said. He said for him, oxycodone and, made him very energized, which is giving the jury everything they need to figure out that he could kill his own freaking family, which was just... So, people were saying, oh, he really, what his mistake was? You know what it was? He shouldn't have testified in his own behalf. He shouldn't have. I mean, he's a lawyer. He knows that whoever testifies on their own behalf has an idiot for a client. Why didn't he know? No, that's not his mistake. His mistake was killing his wife and his son. His mistake was killing his housekeeper. His mistake was drinking with his underage sons, to the point where his underage son killed a girl on a boat and actually was causing the family to face millions of dollars in damages. And he lost his insurance coverage because the maid ended up dead too on his property. He said she tripped over the dogs and bashed her head open on the sidewalk. Well, nobody knows. And then there's another guy that ended up dead like roadkill in the middle of a road that is still an unsolved murder. So there's dead bodies all around this family.